Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Paraclete Press, we're so happy to have you at our virtual launch of Litany of Flights with poet Laura Reece Hogan and with our publisher, John Sweeney. My name is Rachel McKendry. I'm the publicist here at Paraclete. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to celebrate this beautiful book with you, Laura. I'd like to invite everyone now to take a moment to find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit any questions or messages you might have for Laura there or in the chat bar, and we'll hope to get to everyone before the end of our hour. As I mentioned, hosting our launch today is John Sweeney, our publisher here at Paraclete. Welcome, Laura and John.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. And hello, Laura. It's great to be here with you. I'm going to start by introducing you to folks and to say a little something about how we at Paraclete became aware of your poems. All right, so the biography of Laura Reece Hogan on the back of the book is what I'm going to read to you, but I'm going to annotate it a little bit as I go. She's the award-winning author of the poetry chapbook, O Garden Dweller, and a book of spiritual theology, I Live No Longer I. That book, by the way, won a heck of a lot of awards and has a preface by one of my favorite writers, Ruth Burroughs. There, I'm annotating. It doesn't say that on the back cover, but we'll have to get to that at some point. I'm jealous that you have Ruth Burroughs writing a preface to your book. Laura is a Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominee. This volume was the first prize winner in the inaugural Paraclete Poetry Press competition. And this volume is Litany of Flights. That's what we're here to talk about. And this is my copy that's all marked up. Just a word about that contest. So our first Paraclete Prize winner is Laura Reece Hogan. We were awed by her poems. I mean, I think I can speak for the judges. There were three of us. In addition to me, it was the poet Lucy Shaw, who has been writing poems for 70 years, I think. I think Lucy is now 90 years old, a marvelous poet and person, and one of our poets in our stable that we are proud to call one of our poets. And then Mark Burroughs, the poet, professor, translator. And the three of us, we were just wowed by your poems, Laura. The subtlety and the beauty and the probing and the awe. So anyway, we're going to get to that. But her poems are found in magazines like America, First Things, Christian Century, The Crescent, The Windover, Dappled Things, Anglican Theological Review, Whale Road Review. And then when you get to Laura's, her academic degrees, you start to feel a little bit jealous because she's a woman of many talents. She has a JD, she's a lawyer. She has a JD from University of California, LA School of Law. She has an MA in theology from St. John's Seminary. She's a third order Carmelite, and she has a family. So she has a lot going on in her life, and she lives in California. So anyway, that's, I don't know if there's anything to respond to all that, but you are an accomplished person, not just an accomplished.
Wow, thank you, John. I appreciate that introduction. I just want to say I could not be more delighted to be here with you today. Thank you so much, John. Thank you to you, to Lucy Shaw, to Mark Burroughs for selecting Litany of Flights. I'm so incredibly honored to have my work selected by you and be the winner of the Paraclete Poetry Prize. And I just want to thank everyone at Paraclete Press also for putting on this event and for preparing this amazing, amazing, beautiful book. I want to thank John, Mark Burroughs, wonderful editor Bob Edmondson, Rachel McKendry, and everyone who worked to develop that gorgeous design of the book. So beautiful.
Yes, thank you for mentioning our design people, because I like to brag about them every now and then. Not that I have anything to do with their skill or their accomplishments, but they created the world's best copyright page ever for
best
Laura.
Ever.
I just have to do that. And we're going to get to birds. There's a lot to talk about with birds, as a matter of fact, as you saw on that copyright page. But first, let's talk about being a third order Carmelite. I mentioned Ruth Burroughs. I mentioned that you're a third order Carmelite. And there's Carmelite spirituality that flows through these poems in ways that someone might not necessarily catch. Sometimes you name them, but sometimes they wouldn't understand them as Carmelite. Can you say something about Carmelite themes in general and its impact on your life?
Sure. So I am a third order lay Carmelite. And I do feel very steeped in Carmelite spirituality, which is contemplative at heart, but for Carmelites, that includes prayer, community, and service. It's kind of an encompassing thing. Carmelite spirituality, I think, views us as being in relationship constantly with the divine in all moments. So in moments of our loss and emptying, in moments of community and experience of creation, and in more direct spiritual experience of God. So there are some sort of themes that are unique to the Carmelite charism. Like, for example, one is fire. Elijah the prophet is considered sort of the father of the Carmelites, and he's the prophet of fire. He's the prophet that calls down fire from heaven and is taken up in a fiery chariot. And there are other themes maybe that we'll get to later of fire and Carmelite spirituality associated with John of the Cross. But that's one theme. I guess there's several themes. Probably the Song of Songs is an important concept in Carmelite spirituality as well, that idea that we're longing for God and God's absence.
How does the title poem set up the collection as a whole?
Well, I mentioned that kind of experience of God in and through all things. And if we're sincere in the spiritual life, we're kind of always moving a little closer to God. And you can almost view it as like a spiraling upward to God. So about halfway through writing these poems, I realized they all had a connection to that. And as well, an interesting connection to concept of flight. So this title poem, and in fact the whole collection, kind of takes up that challenge of seeing a progressive trend of spiritual stripping away and transformation as the speaker in these poems advances toward more and more intimate union with God.
And then let's say something about Litany. You know, the title of the book, and I'm going to keep holding it up, is Litany of Flights.
Yes. So I love that idea, and it's, you know, kind of apparent in that spiral. We kind of come back around to maybe familiar places, but in our spiritual lives or even our lives, but we're always kind of in a little bit new, different place. So in a way, there's a repetition, and yet we're in a different, new place. So I liked looking at the concept of flights in that sense, but I also like the word litany and its association with saints as well. So we have saints kind of appearing now and then also in the collection.
Well, and the first poem, I mean, I want you to read a few poems in the course of our conversation, but the first one I wanted you to read is Preaching of the Birds. And for anyone who has the book already, it's the poem on page 9. And I, you know, as someone who in my own writing life has a real passion for St. Francis and St. Clare of Assisi and the early Franciscans, I hope that readers catch that title, Preaching of the Birds. It's not preaching to the birds. And I wonder if people are going to catch that. I hope they do. But would you read that poem for us?
I would love to. Yes. Preaching of the Birds. Yesterday, on the feast of St. Francis, I thought, if he were here, preaching to the birds, wrapped in his tunic of every day, his holy knees would sink to my dying grass, one hand pressed to the rough breast of Sister Earth, one lifted skyward in benediction of all flight. The winged would settle quiet, content to roost and preen his every word into each feather, so that later each golden note of courage would float under their hurtling bodies like afternoon angels, blowing updrafts, thermals of divine daring, contrails marking the good fight, the hard business of shouldering onward, scraping insects and droplets of water to nourish this fragile life, the only one given, gives itself away or is taken by others. Violence snaps in the bushes, creeps at the edges of the lawn, but Francis sits cross-legged in the center, his frayed cloak breezed wide as a hawk as he lifts voice in fluid melody, his chest expanding lyric, offers praise of the great goodness who reverberates new hum eternal, the one true warble of leaf and sunshine and dew, of treetop and sky-tuned beak, of peeping tufted bundles and sure first yellow shafts of day. Everything else, here, his notes crest higher, brush the blue underskirt of eternity. Everything else lies outside the light, outside our soft nested peace. Today, full of his joy, their throats spilled over his sermon to me, and I awoke unbound as those disciples of the air.
Thank you. You know, so I'm very captured by wings and your use of wings and images of wings throughout this collection. I counted them, and I think I counted 30 uses of the word wings throughout the book. The word, you know, in one form or another occurs about 30 times. And of course, wings mean birds, wings mean angels, wings mean human spiritual desire and aspiration. Mm-hmm. And when I say 30, I'm not even counting the ways in which you, and I don't know if you consciously do it or if it's, you know, subconscious or whatever, but the words that you use that kind of play on wings that are related, like gnawing and knowing, mm-hmm. those words used in the poem Good Fruit. Mm-hmm. And heartwing, which is not a word I knew, used in the poem The Eagle. So anyway, there's so much about wings, and it means so many things. Wings mean so many things in the natural world and in our emotional and spiritual imagination. Can you say something about yourself and about how you come up with what you write about? How does it come out of you? Where does it begin, and how do you make those kinds of decisions?
I would say definitely in this collection, the natural world plays such a huge part of the images and it is true that very often something in the natural world will suggest or spark a poem to me. But my interior world also really plays a huge role. I mean, whether it sparks in prayer or contemplation, or whether I bring it back to contemplation. It's a very intertwined experience in my writing. I would say, on the subject of wings, Thérèse of Lisieux and her little bird comes to mind, the little bird versus the mighty eagle, and that interesting paradox of things can seem fragile and vulnerable, and yet paradoxically at the same time be timeless and full of wisdom and joy. So I feel like it's interesting that I do come back to, in this collection, to those images again and again, but in very different ways. And they kind of spoke themselves into a collection in a sense, because the angles were so different each time.
Yeah, no, they really did. In fact, one thing I didn't say at the top when I was talking about the Paraclete Press Poetry Competition was that the award was given to you because it was a collection of poems, a book-length collection of poems. And that's what we asked for. We were looking for poets who had never been published in book length before. And what you presented to us was just a gorgeous collection around these themes.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the themes have great depth and variance. That's part of what I guess I'm suggesting. Even just the name that you gave to the parts in the book, I think, are interesting and profound at times. And I hope that people catch it as well. For instance, I love the name of part 2, which is Loft the Bones. And again, it's one of those things where I hope people catch what that means. It's kind of like, preaching of the birds instead of preaching to the birds. You have to know a little bit about birds, right, to catch what Loft the Bones means. I mean, tell us what that means.
Oh, yeah, so that phrase, each phrase for the 3 sections comes out of a specific poem, of course. So, and that phrase comes out of Blood Feather. And that poem is about a hawk, a wild red-tailed hawk that's being cared for, and this hawk would be released back into the wild. So the goal was flight and release for this hawk. So Loft the Bones, there are many images in the book of being stripped down. So the bones plays, blood and bones kind of plays an important, those are important images. So when we loft, I guess I think of it as we're bringing our core self again and again to God. So lofting the bones is that essential core, and how do we keep lifting that?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and as thinking just about birds, because sometimes my imagination is very rooted in the ground. I was thinking just of the fact that the reason why birds take flight is because their bones are hollow and very light.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, I was even just thinking of it in that sense. And there's something really I think you discuss and you probe a bit in the poems. The earthly and the heavenly runs throughout.
Yes, definitely. And then that first title poem, I think that's a really key line about the hollowing of the bones that makes us able to be light
Right.
in both senses, so yes, that is definitely a movement that carries through the whole collection.
Well, some of the flight elements of birds and angels and contemplation really converge in one of the poems called Transmission. Could you read that one next?
Sure. Let me find it. Okay. Transmission. Red-tailed vortex of air spiraling above the freeway, shimmering heat of 1,000 valley vehicles pulsing a signal. Midday thermal currents invite a dozen wheeling hawks. A kettle organizes like a ladder of angels, a summons to float freely, immersed in the higher home. My longing, a grounded bird, thrashes against the metal and traffic, but they rest on wings of another for a little, soar on the flow, talons and beaks above and below, on tongues of exhaust. They glory round the cell tower, disguised as a 2-emerald, 2-stiff palm. They ring the blue finger of God. The transmission requires a path, my displaced breath of words, the updraft, a wrestling reach sunward, carried high and higher. The warmth, the movement, the center builds, a wafting whole, a transient channel, permeable gyre of connectivity, a sky road even wingless eye could take. Open the roof, give my eyes to the dazzle, repeat like a mantra, like Dorothy in Oz, like Mary of Bethany. Repeat the need for only one thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I know that there are a few people who are with us today who are poets themselves, and I know that we have a lot of writers who are with us today. And writers are always interested in the process. Because for many of us, writing is a process as much as it is a result, you know. I'm sure you can relate. So would you just say something about the very ordinary, mundane kind of stuff? Like, where do your poems begin? Pencils, pens, notebooks, straight to pixels? How often do you talk about them with friends? Do you not want to talk about them with friends? Just say something about the process.
Sure. Yes, pencils and pens and paper, essential. And so much can get lost if you don't have those around. I actually always begin by just writing notes on paper, and then it moves to a Word document, and then I keep playing and playing. As all writers know, you keep playing and playing. Sometimes these poems are sparked by an image, and sometimes it's just something that starts bubbling up. I do have some wonderful, wonderful friends that I who are poets who, you know, we kind of exchange work and comment on each other's work, and I find that helpful. But I also really want to bring the poem to a place where I feel like it's speaking itself into existence before I do share it.
Some of their poems are about the natural world in a way that doesn't feel like God is present. Some of your poems seem to be ruminating on things that have nothing to do with spiritual matters. I think that's part of what keeps the whole collection fresh, actually. You know, it's not as if you're just going to a spirituality course. There's a lot of things here. But say something about that, about when you write a poem where the divine is absent. Does that come from a place of spiritual darkness, or does it just come from a place of expressing what the world is at that moment? Or just say something about that. And then I think there's a poem I'm going to suggest you read after you talk about that for a minute.
Okay, sure. I would say both, John. Some poems are coming from a place of divine absence, definitely. A dark night, or just experience of a longing for the presence of God, definitely. But there are other poems in this collection that are coming out of sort of ordinary experience. And I just feel like it's so important in the spiritual life to recognize that your entire life and your entire being are all encompassed by the divine, right? So, you know, ordinary experience is just as important in you and your humanity and your development, and yes, your spiritual life as a more direct spiritual experience. So that's where some of these poems do come from. Yes.
Well, the one that I wanted you to read that might fit this category is on page 46 for those who have the book. Cherith. Could you read that one?
Yes.
And I don't know if you want to say anything about it before or after you read it, but I think
okay. Yeah, no, I would. This is, you actually chose one that interestingly, yes, that's a great choice because it has sort of presence, absence, and then presence again. And the title Cherith refers to a location in 1 Kings where God sends Elijah the prophet to the wadi, or the riverbed Cherith, to provide for him during a drought. So this is Cherith. Before you sent me down to the wadi, there was that goldfinch shining. Swaying, it lingered, warbled, flew away, away, away to the blue mountain. Each beat of wing a stop in my heart. Stay, stay, stay. The shadow of your bird and me shifted. My love slipped the green and lilac banks of the river beyond rushes and the reaches of my throat. Then those days wheeled on the track, puffing, mechanical and drawn. 1,000 tongues choked on salt, not bread. I turned into a pillar, looking for your warm yellow breasts. A drought later, I forgot to remember how you had taken yourself away from me. My reshaped heart studied bundles and branches worn into grooves, patience uncounted. Is that why you sent me down to Cherith, to hide me in your hands, to drink of the stream in cool, deep swallows? Sometimes I am afraid to touch the beauty of the emerald mossy stones. They make me ache with riparian joy. Your goldfinches alight, feed me presence and song, and it is for this your finest wheat I have longed.
Do you think of your poems as prayers?
Yes, I do. Yes, the you ends up being the divine kind of often, and they are written that way. I do think of them very often as prayers, yes.
And when you're writing a poem, how do you know when it's done?
Oh, that's such a difficult question. But sometimes, how do I know when it's done? I think you keep kind of playing with it, and then you know when you've hit what you're trying, or what the poem is trying to say, or what you're trying to say, whether it's you finally get the right word or you reorganize it so the ideas flow in a different way. At some poems there's a poem in this book, Unexpected Wings, that it probably took a year to get right. But usually a poem doesn't take that long to get right. But I don't know, I think you just know that it's saying what it is trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Why don't we move to light and fire?
Sure.
A couple of other enduring themes throughout the poems in this collection, and a couple of other themes from Carmelite spirituality. So can you say something about that? How is light and fire important in Carmelite spirituality?
Sure. So I already mentioned the idea of Elijah being the father of Carmelite spirituality, the association with Mount Carmel there, and him being a prophet of fire. But I think it's carried through the theology associated with Carmelite spirituality. Most profoundly in the work of John of the Cross, who images God and divine transformative action as fire. So God is the living flame of love, always acting upon us. And depending where we are in the spiritual life, that is oppressive and dark and painful, or something wonderful and unifying. So John uses light, fire, the sun, to teach us about the action of God and stripping away and transforming us in greater likeness to the divine.
Beautiful. Can you read one of the poems, maybe one of your favorite ones that represents those themes?
Oh, sure. So I guess I might read Drawn, which kind of combines. So I live in Southern California. There have been fires here, so wildfire also plays a role in some of these images throughout the collection, actually. But this poem I will read kind of takes from both the spiritual aspects of fire and the natural wildfire aspects. So here's Drawn, which was, by the way, written for Ephesians 2:4-5. So it's coming out of Ephesians. Even when we were dead, you reached us with your fiery fingers, even deep in the dark nether landscape, the flame at last catching, etching. Not an easy thing to awaken to this burning, yet we turn into the blistering luster of it, eager for the mistakes to erase in smoke. Twice I have seen the walls of my home glow orange. The first, an inferno of wildfire, reflected its destructive image there, an unnatural midnight sun flickering over a drawing of you, a penciled desire of a drawing of you, your eyes closed in prayer. The second, persimmons, alight in the dying autumn rays, tinted the whole interior, a seeming pastoral, until I considered the still life of a body letting go in bright dappled yield. Both blazes revealed your consuming mercy. Our wings home to it, our antenna prick to the warm, swelling updraft of it, the scoring and scorching of the terrible approach, the blood red falling away of our transgressions. The likeness inside leaps to greet, rushes to be brought to life, moths trembling into your magnetic heat as you render us in love.
I love that one. That makes me think, Laura, I've got to ask you, do you write poems occasionally that you don't publish, that you don't want to publish?
Yes, I do. Right. I mean, they're a form of journaling in some sense. Yes. I mean, so I write a journal. I write prose. I write poetry. So then I kind of see what it is.
Right. Well, and actually, let's say something about that. So this is maybe one of the last themes that I want to get to. And I'm signaling that Rachel will come back on in 5 minutes or so. And I know there's a bunch of people banging away on the chat bar that I can see scrolling to the side here, but Rachel will bring some questions from people who are watching. So the last thing I wanted to explore, though, with you was this, what you just were starting to allude to, is that you do write poetry and prose both, and you do them both very well. They're quite different, right? I mean, I've often thought that the most simple explanation of what a poem is that or what it does, is that it speaks in a way that you can't speak in prose. I mean, there's certain things you can't do in prose that you can do with a poem. And it strikes me that one more theme that runs throughout A Litany of Flights is the theme of unknowing, you know, which also comes out of Carmelite spirituality and spirituality in lots of Christian expressions. So I wonder if you could say, this is a very big question, but you know, go with it in any direction you want. What poetry can do that prose can't, unknowing, and how do you actually begin to talk about unknowing and coming to the divine through unknowing, or can you? And your poems and how they relate to all of that.
Sure. So there are two kind of contrasting theologies of the knowability of God. I think you're alluding to one being this negative way, the via negativa, apophatic theology, the other being the positive way, the via positiva, cataphatic theology. So the via negativa asserts we cannot know God, and so everything is an unknowing, whereas the positive way asserts we can know something of God through God's creation. So the really difficult thing about writing in the via negativa is writing itself is cataphatic. it's a positive expression, images, sights, sounds, it's sensory impressions. So it is a challenge. And the way I think, for example, John of the Cross approached that is in some of his poems, we have words like stammering and I was an unknowing. So that poses a challenge, but poetry is a different, it's so helpful in that there can be space in the form. Words can have layers, or there can be an illusion that gives depth in a different way than prose does. I like looking, when I think of the Via Negativa, to the natural world for hints and encouragements about how would we advance and complete unknowing of who or what the divine is. And even things like the poem I read, Drawn, the moth somehow intuits its way to the flame. And another poem in this book, Painted Lady Butterflies, who they somehow migrate to a completely unknown land. And there's a poem about a mourning dove also that somehow intuits its way forward in the work it needs to do in unknowing and darkness.
Where did
that
your
answer your question?
Oh, no, it did. I mean, we could go on to lots of different strands of this, but I don't think we will have time. But it does make me, I mean, just those poems that you just referenced, they were all about birds. And so I think I need to know more about, where did your love for birds begin? Is there something very sort of ordinary to answer that, or is it something sort of mystical? I mean, where does the love for birds and the bird imagery come from?
Oh, there's so much to love about birds. I have always loved birds. Hawks have kind of played a special role in my spiritual life over many, many years, which that turns up in I Live No Longer I, that book. Two of my children ended up being falconers. So I had red-tailed hawks living nearby. But I am blessed to live in a place where I have lovely birds around, and I'm very attuned to the sight of birds. And it does speak to me.
No, clearly, obviously it does. That comes through very clearly. Well, so I'm going to now sort of signal Rachel to come back on. She has questions I know that people want to ask.
Okay, thank you, John.
As John mentioned, we have a lot of Carmelite friends with us today. Father Nicholas Blackwell was pointing out that this was at one time the feast of St. John of the Cross today, November 24th. And he's asking, Laura, if you wrestle with the image of the bird that is bound, an image used by St. John of the Cross.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, John of the Cross in his maxims mentions a bird, even bound by the slenderest thread, is still a bound bird. So John of the Cross is referring to attachment in the spiritual life. And Father Nicholas, it's fantastic that you would ask that, because that actually is something that was in the back of my mind during the writing of some of these poems. That whole idea of what can release us like a bird into ultimate flight to God, and what holds us back. So I love that. Thank you for bringing that up, Father Nick. And thank you for being here today. I really appreciate that.
Others have noted about the birds. Tanya Runyon says her love for birds has gone crazy during the pandemic, and she thinks that's been the case for so many people. Your book is very timely, she says.
Oh, Tanya, thank you so much for coming today. I love Tanya Runyon is a wonderful, wonderful poet. I love her work so much, and she was kind enough to write an endorsement for Litany of Flights. Thank you, Tanya, for being here today. And I have to say also during the pandemic, my focus on birds has grown even more, because that really becomes your world, right?
A few people who are here today are commenting on the inspiration of the natural images in your poems. Elizabeth is asking if you can share any favorite moments of inspiration from encounters with nature.
Sure, I would love to. Yes, this collection is full of moments just like that. One thing that comes to mind is on Halloween night, a blue fox turned up at my back door, and that inspired a poem, "Catch Us the Foxes," which is a line from the Song of Songs. I needed a fox to show up to kind of spur me to write that poem, even as I knew it went in O Garden Dweller, which is kind of a retelling of the Song of Songs. So I needed a fox poem. I didn't need it. I wasn't aware of it until the blue fox showed up. But that was one moment. And I mentioned the painted lady butterflies. They migrated through this area, and they were very inspiring to me. I have a tree, a silk floss tree, that is covered in spikes. That's the way those trees grow. And that tree is very inspiring to me in a poem called "The Joy Tree." That tree blooms very late in the season, these big, beautiful pink blossoms, and it's such an encouragement to me. It's like a tree of patience and joy. So thank you for that question, Elizabeth, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. A very active conversation in the chat bar. It goes back to what John was asking about poetry and prayer, and when your poems are prayers. William says, I'm just trying to find his exact question, what is the difference between a prayer and a poem?
Sometimes there's not much difference. And I think maybe the cry or the heart, the emotional core of a poem, at least many of my poems, is a prayer. But of course, a poem is a thing, right? It has a form. It's workmanship. I mean, it's carefully kind of assembled to have layers and depth, and carries so much meaning. So, in a sense, it's a prayer with that kind of ability to have depth, and also it's shared. It's a shared prayer. So not just a prayer to God, but a prayer that I'm sharing with my community.
Thank you. Lisa is asking, she says, I'm intrigued by all the titles within this collection, both poem titles, section titles, and the book title itself. Would you mind, Laura, talking about the writing process with regard specifically to your titles?
Okay. I think titles are so important, and I do spend time on trying to land on exactly the right title, because it's a piece of information that I'm giving the reader that may not appear otherwise in the poem. It also is often a point of departure. It's the first thing your eyes see when you approach a poem. So sometimes it needs to be, the core message of the poem, but sometimes it's just a starting point. Sometimes it can be, I'm thinking of the poem Substance Theory. It's gives you a completely different idea than what you're actually reading in the poem, the images that you're getting in the poem. So I do spend time. Sometimes it suggests itself immediately to me, but other times I play with a lot of different options. That's a great question. Thank you so much.
A little bit of a follow-up to that, to do with the different sections in the book. Donna is asking, she says, I don't have my book yet, so it might be obvious once I have it in my hand, but how did you decide on the sections of your book? And can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Yes. So there are 3 sections. Donna, thank you for coming today too. There's 3 sections in the book, Donna. And, you know, I mentioned earlier, there's kind of this idea of spiraling kind of in and out of divine presence and absence, but always kind of growing closer to God. So the 3 sections are emerged winged, loft the bones, and scale this light. And they come out of this idea of where we kind of maybe began in the spiritual life. Emerging winged, like emerge, but, you know, realize you do have wings. And those poems are kind of setting the stage of the speaker and the speaker's relationship with God. And the second section, there is a little bit of a struggle with absence and darkness, and loft the bones, as I mentioned earlier. And then the third section, Scale This Light, comes out of a poem called The Color Ultramarine. And it's a line in that poem. And it's the longing of the speaker, wanting to scale the light and come into that mystical flight to God.
Thank you so much. Jody Collins, a lover of words, is asking about the new words that you use. She says, tell me about the word cataphatic. I love learning new words.
Okay, hi Jody, thank you for being here. Sure, yeah, and I don't necessarily like dropping those words, so I'm sorry if that was a heavy one. But yeah, cataphatic is, that just is in contrast to apophatic theology. So cataphatic is expressive and sensory, a way that we can kind of know God through God's creation. Apophatic is that idea of the via negativa. It's silence, darkness, and unknowing. So those are kind of the 2 contrasting. Neither one is a right or wrong way of approaching, theologically approaching God. They're just kind of different theologies.
She's asking for the spelling of apophatic.
Okay. It's APOPHATIC, apophatic. Did I spell that correctly?
It's a spelling bee, and perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Jody. I hope that answered your question. I'm speaking of that third section of the book. Father Nicholas asks, so what might be the troubles with the flying spiral up that you try to touch on in your poems?
Okay. Oh, so yes, and Father Nicholas would know. I think part of the struggle is the struggle. I'm thinking of John of the Cross right now. Divine absence. Even though, so when I speak of divine absence, I'm not really saying God is absent. I'm saying God is always present. But sometimes in the spiritual life, the felt experience is God's absence. So that's really what I'm speaking of. So that would be one thing the speaker in these poems is struggling with. Also, there's kind of a theme in the book of seeing or not seeing, seeing or not seeing. So is the speaker of these poems seeing the grace that's actually there and actually available? And so some of the poems in that last section, there is more seeing and more noticing than some of the earlier poems in the collection.
Thank you so much. Laura, I know you had 2 specific poems in mind because we have images that you also wanted to share. And I don't know what you and John have planned for the rest of our time, but I just didn't want to let that slip by.
That's exactly what I had planned. I wanted Laura to read 1 or 2 others that she might have, you know, on her heart today, because I'd love to hear what those are.
Okay, sure. So yes, I did have a couple of images to share. Thinking of inspiration for poems, I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Jerusalem in May of 2019, and this image is of actually, well, it's the putative, possible pools of Bethesda, which is in Jerusalem near the Sheep Gate. And being in that place where the pools were located and where Jesus walked really brought home the humanity of that interaction between Jesus and the paralytic in John 5:1. And on going back and reading that text again, I really kind of saw a new challenge in the text. So this is that poem. Do you want to be well? He asks. Seems like a simple question. The man lies in a roughshod portico in Jerusalem at the edge of the healing pool of Bethesda, sick for 38 years. Was the inquiry ironic? Emphasis on want. Can you blame the man for being a little defensive? Maybe you or I also would start telling Jesus about how we do not have, how no one helps, how we cannot move, how everybody else gets there first. See this paralyzing weight of flesh, these problems, these people, rooting me motionless, even in the presence of the divine cure. But then that pointed question reduces, cuts through the noise, brings the excuses boomeranging home. Do you want to be well? So that poem actually also has a concrete element in it. And I can maybe share that with my book here. The excuses actually kind of make up a boomerang in the text. So there are a couple of poems in this collection that have little concrete elements like that.
And then the last one.
The last one. Okay. So I did want to share an image with this one as well, because it's kind of hard to sometimes imagine these ripe Hachia persimmons. This poem I am about to read considers sort of mystical flight to God. So it was really important to me to have a really tangible, earthy, finite point of departure for the poem because it ends at such an infinite point. So I took this photo of these ripe Hachia persimmons so you can see how mushy and overripe they actually have to be before they're edible, which is just what's so amazing to me about these persimmons. And that was the inspiration for this poem. Who is to say what it looks like to be perfectly ripe for our purpose? And I also just want to say the three Teresas mentioned in this poem are Teresa of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, and Teresa of Calcutta, or Mother Teresa. So this is substance theory. The skin of the persimmon is not what it used to be. Who is to say that it is a less lovely sphere, dulled to ripe auburn pulp, and although pecked, sun-patched, the tree speaks them tenderly into being each season. Each in turn turns to teach the turn to the one sweet heat. A Hachia meets its appointments, matures beyond the astringent orange sheen, reaching for Teresa, reaching for Therese, reaching for Teresa, reaching for the utter center of the divine diamond fruit, an arrow into flame, and in living flame leaps and ignites the next. Incandescent in the setting gold embrace, she gathers her ruddy round wisdom, flares her warm fragrance on high. I have kept both fresh and mellowed in store for you, my love. I can say I love ardently. I will say we cradle stars. I can say I hold the key. I will say we usher others through. Root wither, wind bite, and branch bend, lead us here. A final kiss for the crumbling leaf crown, a release of the heavy, soft body. In the time of their visitation, they will shine and dart about as sparks through stubble. Perhaps you will just make out the glimmer of each autumnal halo in the dusk, and it will light something inside, in the juiced middle, near the seed heart. Who is to say the puckered, rusted, red flesh is less lovely when it may be taken, consumed, and dissolved into molecules, into acid nebula, into fusion, into fire?
And that is where Laura's collection ends. That is the final poem in the collection. May the tree speak each of us tenderly into being each season.
Amen.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura, very much. Thank you for being here. I'm going to hold up the book one more time, and then I'm sure Rachel's going to say goodbye to everybody, but I'm glad to have been here with you.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for being here with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your wonderful questions and conversation.
Thank you, Laura and John. Thank you to all of you who have joined us today. So many beautiful comments flowing in, which I will be sure to pass on to Laura. I'm just frantically saving the chat as they, as they keep popping up here. This event, we live streamed on Facebook, but a recording will be available on YouTube later on today, and you'll all receive a link. So if you want to share it with any friends who you know would be blessed by Laura's words, you're welcome to do that. And Litany of Flights and the entire Paraclete Poetry Collection are available from your local booksellers. If they don't carry them, we're happy to help. You can visit paracletepress.com or give us a call. And if you do want to order your copy of Litany of Flights from our website, you can enter the coupon code POETRY at checkout, and you'll get a special 10% off discount right now. So especially with the holidays approaching, we just ask you to consider poets like Laura, like Lucy, as John mentioned earlier, Mark Burroughs, so many, Tanya Runyon, Sarah Law, both of them are here today. Wonderful to have them here. So many beautiful poets that we're privileged to publish here at Paraclete. So we ask that you would consider the gift of words this holiday season. Again, use the coupon code POETRY at checkout if you're ordering from paracletepress.com. And of course, we always encourage you to visit your local bookseller as well. We hope you enjoyed this wonderful, refreshing hour together as much as we did. Congratulations again, Laura, on this stunning collection. Thank you so much, John, for talking with us today. Our prayers are with all of you for health and safety during this pandemic. We wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving and also a blessed Advent one this weekend. Hard to believe that's already here. We hope you'll join us for more of these times together with our authors and poets. And our calendar of online events is available on our website, paracletepress.com. Thank you again, Laura. Thank you, John. Thank you all of you for coming. God bless, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care.